You told me about the reason why you wrote this book. I think we should start with this term, a meritocracy.
A meritocracy is where chances are equal, and therefore those who succeed believe they deserve their success. Those who succeed believe their success is a reward for their talent and effort and virtue. That's a meritocracy.
Now, in relation to this question, let's hear why Professor Sandel criticizes meritocracy, because he thinks it's problematic.
Well, let's take an example of someone who is very successful from the world of sports and who enjoys tremendous rewards. Take the great basketball player, LeBron James. How would we answer these two questions? Question one, what do people think about LeBron James in relation to effort and talent? Well, effort, he practices very hard. But I could practice just as hard, even harder, all day long for years and years, and I would never be a great basketball player.
He's born with it.
LeBron James has a lot more athletic talent than I will ever have.
Sure.
Right?
All right.
But would we say that that talent, having that talent, is his own doing? So that's the question in thinking about question one.
Indeed, no one can start fairly. DNA itself is born from heredity, from parents. It's all different from there.
That's right.
Well, maybe someone disagrees. You can disagree.
By the way, some of the things you said, not everyone can achieve the same results when they try, but I think it's also a skill to discover their own talents. What do you think of that?
Yes, discovering one's gift is part of merit. That's true. But do we feel that they deserve all of the rewards that go from discovering and exercising those talents? Well, so that does take us to the second question from the poll, from the survey.
You can't say that you achieved all your talents. On the other hand, there are definitely people who can't express their talents because they don't try. I think it's right to be rewarded for that.
Right.
What I really sympathized with is that discovering that talent is a situation where I can discover something. And when I become an environment, I can discover my talent and try. You can't even find it in a barren environment. And even if you do, you have to be educated. So I think there's a sense of injustice all over the process at that stage.
Yes, LeBron James practiced basketball hard every day, but it's not like sports players in unpopular sports didn't try. He made the best effort in his sport. So this, if you want to measure the amount of effort, you can go beyond that. I think the issue of compensation is something that can't be divided like cutting radishes at once. So I think it's a very sensitive topic.
This has been a fascinating discussion because you've already developed some of the big philosophical questions, but I'd like to identify one that has come up in this discussion: the role of luck in relation to merit. You've identified two different kinds of luck as I've listened to this conversation. One is the luck to have talents and gifts that may come from my own effort, but may also come from the accident of my genetic makeup, or the good luck of being born in a certain family and society and community. That's one kind of luck. But you've also talked about a second kind of luck. Let's go back to LeBron James. Is it his doing that he lives in a society that loves basketball and rewards it? Or is that also his good luck? If LeBron James had lived back in the days of the Italian Renaissance, they didn't care about basketball. So he could be just as talented. He could practice shooting free throws all day long, but they cared more about great fresco painters than basketball players. So that too is an element of luck. Now, noticing these two kinds of luck that you've identified, I think should remind us of a certain humility. Because when we realize the role of luck in our success, I think we're more likely to have a certain sense of humility in the face of our success, rather than to believe it's entirely our own doing. Meritocracy is the idea that the winners deserve their winnings, that they have achieved their success on their own. So the paradox is that merit, which is a good principle. If I need surgery, I want a surgeon who is well qualified. Merit is a good thing when it comes to hiring people for important jobs, right?
Yes.
But when merit becomes a way of evaluating the worth of people, so meritocracy creates two problems. Actually, there are two problems with the attitudes meritocracy creates. One problem is the meritocratic hubris among the winners, among the successful. Those who landed on top, the winners, came to believe that their success was their own doing, that it proved their superior merit, and therefore that they don't really owe very much to those who have been left behind.
A long time ago, this line came out in a drama. Some people think they were born on third base and hit a triple. I'm sure he tried. If I had come home and raised my score, I would have tried to run from third base to home. He was born at third base in the first place, right?
That's possible.
And the other problem is the sense of humiliation among those who are left behind, who come to believe that their failure is their fault. Those left behind had only themselves to blame.
In other words, it's natural for winners to feel arrogant. For losers to feel humiliated, it can be helped. It's your fault. It's your fault, so it's inevitably be. I think the key is to move to the conclusion that a meritocratic society itself is just and right.
The difficulty of class mobility and growing inequality is not just a problem in the United States, But the same thing is happening in Korea. Mr. Sandel, do you know the Korean proverb, a dragon in a stream?
I think it'd be interesting if you knew.
Yes.
Oh, you know this?
Yes, I've heard this phrase. Dragon can rise from a stream.
Oh,
Yes,
맞아.
this is the Korean version of the American dream, isn't it?
That's right.
Could I ask a question?
Yep.
How many people in this class believe that today it is possible for a dragon to rise from a stream?
I think it's possible.
Me too.
It depends on what the dragon is.
So, let's ask how much is possible.
These days, being a popular YouTuber or becoming a celebrity, if some people take the opportunity well in this way, can move the class at once. Even if such cases are rare, they are still coming out. Therefore, the reason why young children keep dreaming of becoming YouTubers and celebrities seems to be the trend toward jobs that allow them to move to such classes.
I think the chances are much less than they used to be. In the past, if you work hard in your field, you will succeed. I think there are only a few areas where that class can be moved.
So when I used to write my future dream with my friends, there were a lot of different jobs. Now, like a celebrity or YouTuber,
It got really hard.
Last year, there was a result of several surveys in Korea with this question. According to that, only about 11% of Koreans think it's possible.
The survey that you just cited, Professor Kim, suggests that most Koreans believe that social mobility is very difficult now. Now, here I notice an important difference here. When Americans are asked this question, the majority say yes. We Americans traditionally told ourselves, we don't have to worry so much about inequality because in America, no one is stuck in the class of his or her birth. In America, it's always possible to rise. This is the American dream. But today, that comforting story is no longer true.
And in this day and age, in the midst of globalization, the defeated people are increasingly choosing to die at the death of despair.
We've been discussing attitudes toward winning and losing that make the winners believe their success is their own doing and that make the losers feel that their failure is their fault and therefore that they're humiliated. And this is exactly the sentiment that contributes in too many cases to suicide. So suicide is an expression of the attitudes we've been discussing. Of deaths of despair. And this shows that the attitudes toward success and failure that have accompanied the deepening inequality of recent decades, these attitudes are deeply demoralizing for those who feel left behind. And the result is that they embrace authoritarian populist figures like Trump, and sadly, tragically, they have a higher incidence and a growing incidence of suicide, of deaths of despair.
당신들 힘든 건 당신들이 못나서 그렇다. 왜 더 졸라매지 않냐? 여기서 더 졸라매면 한강다리 갈래도 차비가 없어서 걸어가다가 굶어 죽을 판인데 그따위 소리들 하고 있다 이겁니다. 우리 인간 아니에요. 그 사람들한테 우리는 책상에 앉아 더했다 뺐다 하는 종이에 박힌 숫자고, 시키는 대로 하다가 새끼 낳아 길러서 머릿수만 채우면 되는 가축. 그래놓고 지금 우리들한테 뭐라 그래요? 지금 주고 있는 것도 아까우니까 가진 건 내놓고 나가라잖아. 여러분들 쫓아내고 그 자리 그대로 비워둘 것 같아요. 월급 몇 푼 깎아서 파견직으로, 계약직으로, 외주업체로 여러분 그대로 그 자리 다시 채워 넣을 거예요.
Work is not just a means of making money. What I mean to this society, what I get recognized for what I do, I think it's a matter of determining a person's dignity.
So I don't think work is just worth the monthly salary. So everything seems to have its own dignity.
I think you're right. There needs to be an affirmative, moral and political vision of the dignity of work. I think we have to address not only the inequalities, but also the lack of recognition and respect for working people. We need to do it at the level of politics, but we also need to do it in our hearts and in our souls to rethink the meaning of success.
그렇구나.
Actually, it's a great story. Can the dignity of work and capitalism really coexist in this system of capitalism?
If we worship money, then the answer is no. It cannot go together with the dignity of work. If we assume that the money people make is the measure of their contribution to the common good, then it's not possible to affirm the dignity of work. Because the delivery person who came to my door today with groceries, that delivery person took certain risks on my behalf. I haven't had to shop in grocery stores during the pandemic. I haven't had to go into my office. I've been able to teach my classes, my Harvard classes, online this semester. But I realize that in order for me to avoid these risks, there are other people in my society who are facing these risks in delivering my food and groceries. But these people are not paid very much. So if we assume that the money people make is the only measure of their contribution, then it's very hard to appreciate the contribution made by that delivery man who came to my door this morning with groceries.
What do you think? Income should be given according to ability. Do you think so? And whether our society is actually working that way? What do you think?
In the past, Korean society used to think that it was natural for people who worked for a long time to get paid a lot when they were young. But after that, I thought it was reasonable to compensate according to the results according to the ability. But after reading your book, I don't think that's right. But we can't go back.
Well, I don't even know what criteria I should set to get compensation. As a result, I think it's a point where I think it's justifiable to get it according to my ability.
In the end, this problem is too difficult. I think I had no choice but to leave it to the market. How driven the lust of others, or the market is how become a decision is how this person in need, supply and demand. More than this question is that, can we come out of solution?
I think demand and supply is not the only answer. Demand and supply is fine if everyone has access to a good education for themselves and for their children, regardless of the supply and demand for their skills. If everyone has access to sick leave from their job, if they fall ill, especially during a pandemic, If everyone has basic respect from their fellow citizens, then supply and demand can have their place in deciding who makes more and who makes less. The problem is relying excessively or exclusively on supply and demand without providing these basic necessities for a decent and dignified life.
So, Professor Sandel, can you tell me what criteria you think income and compensation should be based on?
Being a casino mogul, someone who runs casinos, some are billionaires. They provide a certain contribution, they create casinos, and people like to go to casinos. But is that really as important as teaching and inspiring young people with a love of learning? Is it really as important as healing the sick and caring for COVID patients? Most people would say no. And yet, if we assign the market the moral question, what is the contribution to the common good of this or that social role, we have to conclude that setting up casinos must be more important than curing illness and disease, or than in teaching young people. So what I think ideally is the criterion for for reward is contribution to the common good. Now, as people have discovered, that's a moral question on which people disagree. We disagree because we don't all agree on the meaning of the good life. And how can we decide what contributions matter most without having some sense of what the common good really means? I don't have a simple answer to that question. I don't have a formula to answer that question. But what I do say is this is a moral question. It's an ethical question. It's a question about values that we can't avoid.
By the way, in order for the world to change, the law and policy must change. When we talk to politicians about this problem perception, can they change their minds when most politicians benefit from meritocracy?
I agree. Politicians have a stake in avoiding controversial questions. I think one of the reasons that so many citizens today are frustrated with politics is that they want politics to be about big questions, about values, about ethics, about what makes for a just society. And most of our political debate doesn't really address these questions. And so this is really what I'm calling for. We need to be able to debate as democratic citizens what counts as contributing to the common good.
In order to solve this problem, in the United States and in Korea, we have emphasized a lot about welfare for a considerable period of time. Today, liberal and conservative governments think that we can solve problems from a welfare perspective.
Some say that in order to decide who should get welfare benefits, we need to determine who is responsible for being poor and who is poor based on bad luck. But I think that determination is very difficult to make. And trying to make it requires asking every poor person about whether they struggled due to their own bad choices or due to bad luck. And even this kind of examination can be humiliating.
I mean, to the unfortunate, how did that happen? Did they fail to fulfill their individual responsibilities and produce such results? I think that's going to be painful for them. You're supposed to sprinkle salt on the wound.
You think there's a reason for everything. You're implicitly suggesting that it's because you're ugly.
Isn't this that? It's because of the lack of effort. This isn't right.
Do we want anyone in our society without enough to eat, or without a roof over their head, or without decent access to health care or education? The answer is that everyone should have access to those goods. Then the question of welfare should not depend on a very strict examination of how exactly a poor person came to be poor. Instead, it should be based on a general obligation that we have as citizens for one another, to make sure that no one struggles, no one is denied access to decent health care or education, no children go hungry.
So, how do we collect taxes? I think this could be a problem. Tax, how do you do that?
On taxation, we should begin by thinking about tax policy from the standpoint of values, and in particular, from the standpoint of what tax policy would affirm the dignity of work. And so we should ask, for example, is it fair to tax earnings from interests and dividends at a lower level than we tax earnings from work? In the US, we do it that way. We tax earnings from work at a higher rate than we tax unearned income, income from interest and dividends. Why do we do that? Well, some say it's more efficient that way. It will encourage investment. But if we begin the debate about taxation by asking about values, and by asking about what it means to affirm the dignity of work, then I think we may come to a different answer, or at least we will have a different debate. Should we really tax earnings from labor at a higher rate than we tax earnings from interests and dividends? That's just one example of how we can reframe the debate about taxation in a way that accords greater emphasis to the dignity of work.
I read in the book that Warren Buffett says his secretary pays more taxes than he does.
How does that happen?
If you have a business idea, but it's hard to do it because you don't have money, I think there's definitely a capital contribution to investment, in that you can lend money and actually make that dream come true. But the problem is the difference between the contribution of such investment and the contribution of labor, actual work consistent with the tax on the income we now get from it. I'm afraid there's a problem here.
Martin Luther King, shortly before he was assassinated, gave a speech in Memphis, Tennessee, to a group of striking sanitation workers, garbage collectors. And he said this. He said, the person who picks up our garbage is as important as the physician. Because if he doesn't do his job well, diseases are rampant. And then he said, all labor has dignity. I think Martin Luther King was right. This is the spirit we need. This is what I mean by affirming the dignity of work. Wow. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.